But this practice is just a wellspring of gratitude, pours forth from it. Um, yeah, the, it is to see this wholeness that you, Henry, were talking about so clearly, tenderly today. That invitation, that, when I bow every time, I'm bowing to the whole world. It is the whole world bowing, you know, it is. It really is. And this, we can say, well, yes, there's this sense of just giving and receiving, this constancy that that's what this is. That's what this is, um, and and also this sense of marvel. It's all empty. The beautiful story. It's nothing at all, and yet here we are. It's such a marvel. Uh, I remember trying to express something once, and just someone had asked me to write about an experience, and all what came out was just gratitude is the name of everything. And that sort of unconditional gratitude does more and more pour forth from this world. Yeah, I mean, our dear teacher, Ruben Habito Roshi, would now and then at the end of a session quote this anonymous Japanese verse, I don't know the reason why, but tears of gratitude fall from my eyes. It's, you might think, well, what about all the greed, ill will, and ignorance? What about, I just about said gratitude trumps that. It's just suffusing everything and coming, just coming up. I really love the practice of bowing. It's clearly comes to us from Asian, this rootedness of Zen and Asian traditions. But a number of years ago, when at a particularly hard period, I was going through a divorce. And for the first time in, 25 years, I was alone when I woke up in the morning. And I mean, this was just grace. It could so easily be otherwise. But spontaneously, one morning early on, I got out of bed and did 3 deep bows. Sort of in the direction of the sunrise. I don't know. That's how it happened. Or the moon, it's the same that day at least. and that seemed so fitting that I've made it into a practice. It's just the first thing every morning. And, some mornings that would not be my natural inclination. So there's something about just bowing, no matter the day, that I think is a real, very fitting, and it's a helpful practice. I remember talking once with Ruben about that, and a time when work was particularly gnarly, And he asked if I was still doing these bows. Yeah. And he said, well, why don't you silently, while bowing, say, I commit. Yeah. And so there's also that is part of this. You know, I mean, it's a joy and an honor to bow, of course, but it's also, whatever these empty hands can hold, I offer. And I think of bowing that way.
Oh, thank you so much, Valerie. Beautiful. Dan, we can take another, I think.
Okay, next question. Well, there's the statement first, and let me read this statement before the question. A friend and a fellow Zen student, very dear to me, just died. I find life a mystery. Death, too, is a mystery to me. When my mind ponders these mysteries, it's bewildered. Tears fall till my eyes become too tired. Looking for some rest, they close, and there is darkness. A temporary rest, and not yet the darkness Henry mentioned. The suffering must be felt fully, Henry advised. The heart must be broken open. Perhaps only then I will enter the mystery naked. And the question is, can you talk a little bit about this mystery? Thank you.
Valerie, do you want to pick that up? Or?
Well, I can begin. First of all, I think that's a very beautiful reflection on this mystery of life and death. And I would say it's one mystery, you know, life and death. What is this life? What is it to die? Uh, we actually met the residents, and Dan and I, just for a conversation for an hour. We've been doing occasionally, and the last one, just a couple days ago, someone had very bravely raised the question of death, the matter of death. You know, this is the great matter, certainly in this tradition. I mean, every religious tradition addresses this in some way, but, you know, life and death is a matter of prime importance. It's the great matter, resolving it, resolving it. And so we talked for an hour. It was, someone said, well, death is a conversation stopper. you know, it's and yet it's also the great invitation. I mean, this question, I want to say, thank you. There's a lot of loss, as Henry mentioned, and key, I think, to really the invitation to all of us, but the gift to us of those who die is really inviting us to honestly, nakedly look at impermanence. It's right here. it's this. So there are there's a lot written about impermanence, of course, in this tradition, but one kind of striking refrain is that this honest sort of keeping company with facing, in some sense, impermanence, as just being willing to turn in this direction as best we can, arouses what's called bodhicitta, this sometimes translated as the intention to awaken, the intention of awakening, or the mind of awakening. That this really is an incredible gateless gate. But I'm eager to hear Henry. I just would say that really looking into what is this life, that first question, will open wide the gate, I feel, to what is death. And great mystery, absolute mystery. Henry.
Oh, Valerie, thank you. Wow. Great listening to you. I can't really add anything, just to scatter a few crumbs that nowhere near as beautiful as what you're saying. But I'd say sort of, oh man, mystery. I mean, that's it really. Let it be. Let yourself be in the mystery or be the mystery. This phrase like resolving the great matter, which we hear in Zen, it was just striking me. It's more like it's not that we resolve the great matter. It's
It
that
resolves us. Sorry.
Exactly. I mean, in the face of it, we untie the knot of self. So to resolve it isn't that we get the answer.
Yeah.
Not at all. It's that it unties us. So the knot that I call me is undone.
Mm.
That's how I would put it.
Beautiful.
Well, I don't know about that, but anyway, it's a stab.
There was one other piece of this reflection about, broken heart that you've often spoken of, Henry, this great brokenheartedness. And I've also, a couple times mentioned this book, this little book that I just love the title of, If You're Lucky, Your Heart Will Break, by James Ishmael Ford. And, it's a while ago, where he tells the story of a situation for him where his heart broke, how he would put it, all the way open. Or maybe that's how I put it. I found that very evocative. So this, my heart is breaking. Suddenly, it's this one boundlessness. I mean, the whole, it's the tears of the whole world that are falling. And suddenly this wholeness does have a word to say to us in that brokenheartedness.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you. So Dan, should we take another?
Okay. Next question. Questioner asks, I've been dealing with illness in my practice, facing towards it, feeling groundless, powerless, and afraid. Can you talk about working with illness in practice?
Valerie, do you want to?
Yeah, I mean, of course, heart goes out. I think Henry, you can certainly speak, and you have been speaking so much to these emotions, and they can be so strong: groundlessness, fear, helplessness. I think powerlessness. So one invitation of the practice would be to, of course, allow some space. And also, what if it's just fear? Nothing but fear. Or just groundlessness. And, going toward that, maybe you have a chance to see where there's some resistance to groundlessness. So that might be a way to notice that and release the resistance. And then really, what if it's just groundlessness? So Henry can so well speak to this, lots of experience with emotions, but just one other thing I'd say is on another sort of zone, what came to mind was the Vimalakirti Sutra. I've been keeping company with that a little more lately. And, this great enlightened layperson, Vimalakirti, contemporary of the Buddha, his famous line is, "I am sick because the whole world is sick." So again, it's this, wholeness at this dynamic, what is it that really is going on here? Is we suffer a sense of isolation and that powerlessness with illness. I was real seriously ill years ago. I'm very lucky. And I remember when I was finally well enough to ride in a car, the sense of looking out at the world, looking out the window, out at the world, and everybody else was walking and doing things. And at the time, I couldn't really walk without help. And, I just noticed it. And what I really noticed in my own self, even though I hadn't found Zen yet, but one moment, just, this present moment awareness, somehow it just instinctively, I had so much loving kindness supporting. And that's another thing I would say. There's all this support. There's all this support everywhere. But I knew that if I just did this moment, just this, I couldn't know what would happen. I didn't know if I'd get worse or die, but I knew that I could handle just this. And maybe it was a really nice, I think, precursor to this practice. They're, remarkable teacher. And again, this impermanence. We tend to have an idea that when things are going okay, and then something happens, like a really serious illness, that we've fallen off a cliff or something. There's some different world, alternate reality, and it's we are always plunged right into the heart of this one whole world. To let your practice taste that. I am sick because the whole world is sick. What is that like?
Yeah, thanks, Valerie. I mean, I was just, there's so much in the canon about sickness, and some of Buddha's talks about, there are 4 mountains rolling towards us, one from the north, one from the south, one from the east, one from the west, and they are old age, sickness, death, and rebirth. I think in that particular framing, they're just rolling inexorably towards us and will crush us. And it's one thing to sort of acknowledge that, and of course we can look at Buddha with the 4 encounters that he had as a youth when he escaped from the palace, seeing an old person, a sick person, and a dead person, and then the wandering ascetic, the mendicant monk, and changing his life accordingly. It's one thing to sort of acknowledge that and maybe take up practice or whatever, but it is somehow it seems like a different thing when we actually have a terminal illness, and I mean, again, it's sort of easy to say something like, well, we've all got a terminal illness, we're all going to die, and it's true, of course it is, but it's still different when you're actually right in the thick of it, and I mean, one thing that we might acknowledge is that, isn't it a good thing to have a practice in that situation? Rather than trying to sort of dispel the challenges of it, isn't it at least we can say good to be facing them in the context of a deep, supported, grounded practice? And yeah, it's true. There's a lot of comfort, actually, that we can draw from this great tradition that has stared uncertainty in the face, that thinks that when we're not aware of the uncertainty of basically every moment of our lives, we're deluded. That uncertainty isn't something that sort of switches on and off in our lives when we get a very grave diagnosis. It's not then things are uncertain. It, of course, will strike us much more forcefully, but actually they're always uncertain. And, the older we get, the clearer that is when we lose more and more people. And, of course, one day it's us. So not to say that I mean, yes, if you look at this great tradition, there's comfort on many levels. There's the comfort of the acknowledgement of that simply. There is yes, there's a possible kind of way of really being kind of much more surrendered to it, that can bring a real shift in how we experience things, you know, really surrender to it. I mean, it's not really for one person to tell another to do that, but it is some kind of a possibility. Yeah, that's all I can say right now.
I wanted to just say that what I didn't say was the very first thing. That kind of the obvious thing is to you know, meet it with love and compassion. I mean, compassion, you know, maybe is a combination of acceptance and love in this instance. Yeah, and I really appreciate, Henry, your pointing out the support of having this practice. Yeah, and so much to be said, but you know, Sylvia Ostertag, I speak about from time to time, this German teacher, and yeah, she had a really strong turning experience with a cancer diagnosis, and it. I mean, the main thing is just this open heart, and somehow for her, she discovered it all the more right in the midst of a terminal diagnosis and a terminal illness. So it kind of lights the way. Henry, I remember the book that you read from first a while ago, I Am That.
Mm-hmm.
That was also such a beautiful passage about you know, this man who was visiting this woman who was so desperately ill and young, and 2 small children, married, and you know, he was just listening each time, just listening. And then you know, finally one day he himself had gone to mass before visiting her and had something of an his heart was really touched in that mass, and something made him go to her and say, you know, open his mouth and say, you know, do you want to be at peace? And then there's only one way, and that is surrender. But as I tell that, you know, I think each story is unique and unrepeatable. And yet it's this world.
Yeah. So yeah, Valerie, are you ready? Should we
Yeah.
take another? Yeah.
If there is another, I guess there is.
Yeah, it looks like 2 more questions. Next question. Can Zen and meditation compel practitioners to fight for social justice in a more just world? Can Zen practice motivate people to act against injustice?
Valerie, do you want to pick that up?
Well, there are many instances of that. And I think Zen in the West is being compelled more and more to face this, you know, imperative, I would say, And so we're exploring, different sanghas are exploring how to do that. But I think that, yeah, you have to offer it back. And the clearer we are, I mean, meeting the moment with, as Henry was talking about, this whole meeting, it's this world with its incredible injustice. We sometimes talk about coming home. We come home to that, it's this world. And we each have to really look at this, how to find what's ours to do to alleviate suffering. I mean, that's the vow, right? Sentient beings are numberless. I vow to free them all. So what does that look like? And I think, as I said, there's some really wonderful examples already, but that's the impulse. And I know it can be kind of a struggle. Well, this practice is really about silent sitting. So how do we navigate then, this very clear living out the vow? How do we do that kind of as Sangha and individually in our lives? I mean, Henry, you've been wrestling with this with us and set in motion some action.
Yeah, I mean, it's actually quite a complex issue, I think, and I don't know that in a few minutes I can sort of really do it justice. But of course, the short answer is, why on earth not? If we're seeing more clearly, why should that be limited to purely personal suffering rather than systemic suffering that's caused by an unjust system? And actually, Zen, of all the Buddhist practices in the West, I think it might be. Actually, I don't know. I'm going to get on thin ice here, but I was going to say perhaps Zen has been more engaged. Maybe I'm not. Maybe I'm wrong, but I have the impression that there have been times and places when Zen centers were very openly and visibly engaged in social action. And that that's part of our Western Zen way, more or less, at the moment. I don't know whether you can see it so clearly in the history of Zen or of the history of Buddhism generally, but with some notable exceptions like King Ashoka, 2nd, 3rd century BCE, who was very concerned with social justice. But I think he's often pointed to in this context, I think, because he's kind of unusual. And I mean, there's a lot has been said on this. I mean, Gary Snyder famously said, the mercy of the East is insight into the basic self/void, and the mercy of the West is social reform, something like that. And we need both. And so I think there's an argument that, the Asian meditative contemplative traditions haven't generally impelled social action. But on the other hand, why wouldn't they? I mean, you could look at you might have to just acknowledge, I suppose, that there's more sequestered, cloistered forms of practice, and there's more outward world meeting practice, and there's a place for both. And probably many deep practitioners have both in their biographies, so to speak, Yeah, I think, you know, we could come up with a reading list of a dozen books on the subject, and that might be more fruitful than my vague meanderings in a few minutes.
I do, as you were talking, I flashed on Dharamsala and this huge school that's been set up there for impoverished children, and feeding, housing, schooling, huge outreach project there. And of course, Thich Nhat Hanh. I mean, there's, so I think you did a really nice job of talking about, these twin aspects of practice that we all need. And I just think that I'm not as well read. There probably are many instances in Asian Buddhism, and that I just don't know. But there's no question that the tradition has come up through this contemplative, cloistered, monastic way.
Thank you. Dan, we'll take one more, maybe.
Okay, it looks like, okay, I guess there are two more. We can save it. I can save it over for tomorrow as well. This one, when practicing and finding periods, perhaps a period of deep concentration, sometimes there seems to be a hiccup or a moment where the mind in a blink shuts off and on, or sometimes as if the clutch very briefly engages and the gear shifts, but like a blink, like moment of falling asleep, and then you are either back and wonder what just happened, or sometimes in a concentrated state that you now take notice of differently. Is this a thing, or just perhaps the body nodding off to sleep for a brief moment while concentrating? What should one do or interpret with these moments, if anything at all?
Yeah, if I may, I could try to speak to that. If I've understood it rightly, it's a little gap. I hope I've got that right. And you're not quite sure what happened in that gap. Perhaps there seemed to be nothing at all. I would take that personally. I mean, yeah, maybe it's nodding off, I don't know. But it could be a moment of another form of samadhi, which is like a clear lake without characteristics. It's not, let's be clear, I suppose, in a sense, to say that it's not really awakening. It's just a moment of characteristiclessness. Samadhi without known elements of any kind. That's how I would take that. And I think that can expand, actually. There can be periods when, we sit down, and this would be deep in a retreat. We sit down rather quickly, we're into this sort of lake of a sort of clarity, but we don't know anything about it. And the bell goes, and then the bell goes for the end of the sit. We don't know what happened in between. But we're not lost at all, not lost in thought or anything, not at all. And that's one form of samadhi, rather a deep form of samadhi. Okay, that's my little take on that.
I think that's a good place to stop.
Do you want to say anything? Is that it, Valerie?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Okay, thanks. So Dan, let's thank you so much everybody for questions, and Dan, thanks so much for sort of comparing, whatever the word is, emceeing. And let's